Every mystery has a voice. Few dare to listen.
Bellweather House had the sort of silence which old houses acquire when occupied by people who consider ordinary conversation a regrettable necessity. On the evening in question, however, the silence was broken by 2 rings from the electric bell in Sir Alister Bellweather's study. Then came silence again. Rain pressed against the windows, and the November wind moved round the stone walls with a low, insinuating moan. In the corridor outside the study, Mrs. Agnes Bellweather stood rigidly beside Miss Edith Bellweather, while Mr. Julian Bellweather stared at the locked door as though he had personally offended it. Mrs. Clara Finch held a tray against her waist. Mr. Herbert Pritchard, the butler, stood several paces behind them with the expression of a man who had discovered that civilization was a thin veneer over chaos. Before we proceed, tell us where you are watching from, and what time is it there right now? Put it in the comments. It is always interesting to discover how many different clocks are keeping company with the same mystery. At the far end of the corridor, Inspector Charles Parker was removing his raincoat, having arrived at Bellweather House only minutes earlier for what he had been assured was a family emergency and was now beginning to suspect was a corpse. Lord Peter Wimsey stood beside him, examining the study door. "Locked," said Parker. "Yes, from inside. That is what doors generally aspire to when they are feeling respectable." Parker gave him a look. "Peter, my dear Charles, I am merely defending the door's character. We have not yet established that it has done anything wrong." The study was Sir Alister Bellweather's domain, a long room lined with dark bookcases, portraits, legal papers, and cabinets containing manuscripts sufficiently old to make their owners insufferable. The door was fitted with an old Yale lock. Its key, according to Parker, was visible through the gap beneath the door because the light from the corridor caught the brass. "Nobody has entered since the bell rang," said Parker. "How encouraging. Nobody has left either. Even more encouraging." Parker sighed. "We have tried the handle. It is locked. And the windows? Bolted." Wimsey looked toward the 2 windows at the far wall. Their curtains were drawn, though not quite evenly. Beyond them the rain ran silver down the panes. Mrs. Bellweather spoke from behind them. "Sir Alister always locked himself in when he worked." "At this hour?" Wimsey asked. "Quite often." How reassuringly antisocial. She did not smile. Wimsey glanced at her, then at Edith. The daughter was pale but composed. Julian looked less composed. His dark hair was disordered, and his face still carried the heat of whatever argument had preceded the present catastrophe. Pritchard cleared his throat. Sir Alister was not accustomed to being disturbed in the study. "Indeed," said Wimsey, "a habit which has presumably saved him from many tiresome visitors." The electric bell sounded again. Everyone started. Wimsey did not. He merely turned his head toward the study. The sound was followed by nothing, no footsteps, no movement, no voice from behind the door. Parker stared at him. "You heard that?" "My ears remain disappointingly functional." "Then why?" "Because," said Wimsey, "a bell is a bell, Charles. It is not a death certificate." Parker walked to the door and knocked sharply. "Sir Alister." There was no answer. He knocked again. "Sir Alister." Nothing. Mrs. Finch shifted the tray in her hands. Her face remained impassive, but Wimsey noticed the movement. "Who heard the first bell?" he asked. "Edith," said Agnes. "I did," Edith confirmed. "And the second?" "I heard both," said Julian. Pritchard shook his head. "The first, sir, not the second." Mrs. Finch said quietly, "I heard the second." Wimsey's eyebrows rose. "How very sociable of the bell." Parker ignored him. "When did you last see Sir Alister alive?" The question produced an immediate and remarkable stillness. "At dinner," said Agnes. "After dinner," said Edith. "About 9, said Pritchard. "Later," said Julian. Wimsey looked from one face to another. "Excellent," he murmured. "We have already improved upon the Bible. 4 witnesses and 4 versions of the evening." Parker checked his watch. "It is 23 minutes past 9. Wimsey glanced at the grandfather clock farther down the hall. "Is it?" "Yes. The clock says 19. 4 minutes slow," said Pritchard. "How unfortunate." Parker gave the door another hard knock. I am going to force it. By all means. It would be rather rude to leave Sir Alister waiting." The door yielded after the second blow. The lock splintered, and the panel swung inward. The study smelled of extinguished fire, old paper, and cigar smoke. Sir Alister Bellweather sat in his high-backed chair beside the desk. His head had fallen slightly to one side. One hand rested near a silver ashtray. The other lay upon the arm of the chair. There was no sign of a struggle. Parker crossed the threshold. Wimsey remained outside for a moment. The study clock on the mantel stood motionless at 9:20. Parker bent over the body. "He's dead." Wimsey entered. He looked first at the windows, then at the desk, then at the key lying beside Sir Alister's right hand. The key was inside. The windows were secured. The door had been locked, and yet the bell had rung. Wimsey moved toward the desk and crouched. Beneath its edge was a small brass bell mechanism, old-fashioned and slightly tarnished. He touched nothing. He merely looked at it. Interesting," he said. Parker straightened. "What?" Wimsey stood. "My dear Charles, I have not the least idea." He smiled faintly, though his eyes remained upon the little brass mechanism. "At present I am only being interested." Outside, the rain beat harder against the windows. Inside, the dead man's cigar had gone cold. And somewhere within the walls of Bellweather House, a bell waited patiently for its next opportunity to tell the truth badly. Section 2. The household knows nothing. By 9:30, the servants' hall had acquired the solemnity of a courtroom, and rather less honesty. Inspector Charles Parker had established himself at the long kitchen table with a notebook, while Lord Peter Wimsey occupied a chair near the fire, looking as though he had been invited to a tedious tea party. Rain rattled upon the windows. Somewhere above them, the broken study lock was being examined by Constable Edward Moss. Parker began with Mrs. Agnes Bellweather. "You say you last saw your husband at dinner?" "Yes. After dinner, I heard him go into the study." "At what time?" She considered. 9 o'clock. Wimsey looked into the fire. "Precisely. Approximately." "Ah," he said. "A useful word. It has concealed more murders than arsenic." Agnes ignored him. "I heard the study door close. After that I went upstairs." "Did you hear anything else?" "No." "Not the bell?" "I heard the bell later." "Which bell?" "The study bell." Parker wrote this down. "At what time?" 9:17, I believe. Edith, seated nearby, looked up. "Mother, you cannot know that. The hall clock showed 17 minutes past 9, but the hall clock is slow." 4 minutes, Pritchard supplied from the doorway. Parker looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because I wind it, sir." "Every day?" "At 8 in the evening." Parker turned to Wimsey. Wimsey smiled politely. One should never underestimate the importance of a man who winds a clock. Pritchard's expression suggested that he was accustomed to being underestimated and had made a career of permitting it. Parker returned to Agnes. "You heard the door close at 9? "Yes." "And you heard no voices?" "No." "No footsteps?" "No." "Then you cannot say Sir Alister was alive at 9. Agnes stiffened. "I heard him enter the study." "That is not what I asked." "No." Parker closed the notebook. Edith was next. "You heard the bell?" "Yes, at 17 minutes past 9, according to the hall clock." "And did you see your father after dinner?" "No." "Did you hear him speak?" "No." "Anything unusual?" She hesitated. "Only the argument. With Julian?" "Yes." Julian, standing near the window, gave a bitter laugh. "There was nothing unusual about that." Parker glanced at him. "We shall come to you." Edith continued. "The argument ended before 9. How do you know?" "I looked at the clock." "The hall clock?" "Yes." Wimsey's eyebrows rose. Edith noticed. "It was not my fault that it was wrong." "My dear Miss Bellweather," he said, "clocks are seldom invited to accept responsibility for their deficiencies." She almost smiled, then remembered the dead man upstairs. Parker asked, "What did you do after the argument?" "I went to the drawing room." "Alone?" "Yes, until I heard the bell." Parker wrote again. Mr. Herbert Pritchard was interviewed next. He stood with his hands behind his back. "You were in the corridor at 9:10. Approximately, sir. Doing what? Checking that the fires were properly banked. Did you pass the study? Yes. Was the door closed? Yes. Did you hear anything? No. Footsteps? No. Voices? No. Music? No. Anything at all? Pritchard thought. The house was quiet. Wimsey tilted his head. How quiet? Pritchard looked faintly puzzled. Ordinarily quiet, my lord. Ah, an important distinction. Parker suppressed a sigh. And you say the study corridor is usually quiet? Very quiet, sir. The carpet is thick. Could someone walk there without being heard? Yes, even close to the study. Quite possibly. Parker made another note. Mrs. Clara Finch entered carrying a pot of coffee. She set it down without spilling a drop. You were polishing silver earlier. Yes, Inspector. When? From approximately 8:50 until 9:25. Continuously. Yes. Anyone see you? Mr. Pritchard came through the pantry. Pritchard nodded. That is correct. Parker looked between them. What were you polishing? Silver candlesticks. How many? 6. Could you have left the pantry? No. Wimsey looked at her. 6 candlesticks. A formidable undertaking. Mrs. Finch met his eyes. They were tarnished. That explains the moral urgency. She did not answer. Parker turned toward Julian. You were in the study with Sir Alister earlier. Yes. At what time did you leave? About 9. Exactly. No. You argued with him? Yes. What about? Money. Did he threaten to disinherit you? Julian looked toward Agnes. That is a family matter. Parker's voice hardened. Sir Alister is dead. Julian's jaw tightened. He said I would receive nothing. And what did you say? I said he would regret it. Silence followed. Wimsey examined the cuff of Julian's coat, then his face. Do you often regret things immediately after saying them? Julian stared at him. No. How inconvenient. Parker closed his notebook. One final question. When you left the study, was Sir Alister alive? Julian answered at once. Yes. Wimsey looked up. How do you know? I heard him speaking. To you? No. He spoke after I turned away. Do you remember the words? Julian frowned. Something about my mother. Wimsey said nothing. Parker dismissed him. For several moments nobody spoke. The rain continued its assault upon Bellweather House. Parker finally rose. So, he said, we have Agnes hearing the door at 9, Edith hearing the bell at 9:17, Pritchard seeing the corridor empty at approximately 9:10, Finch supposedly polishing silver until 9:25, and Julian leaving the study at 9. Yes, said Wimsey. They cannot all be right. No, nor can they all be lying. Wimsey glanced toward the ceiling, where the dead man's study lay beyond sight. People rarely lie about the same thing in quite the same fashion. Parker frowned. What does that mean? My dear Charles, it means precisely what it says. He reached for the coffee Mrs. Finch had brought and took a thoughtful sip. Besides, the household has given us something more valuable than the truth. Parker waited. What? Wimsey smiled. Certainty. He put down the cup. And certainty, in a murder investigation, is generally the first thing one should distrust. Section 3. The nephew with muddy boots. Inspector Charles Parker had not been at Bellweather House for an hour before he discovered the first advantage of murder. It made family finances considerably easier to discuss. Julian Bellweather stood before the library fire, shoulders squared and face pale with anger. Parker had brought him in from the corridor, where the younger man had been pacing. You quarreled with Sir Alister, Parker said. Yes, you threatened him. I said he would regret what he was doing. And what was he doing? Destroying me. Julian laughed shortly. He had decided that I was irresponsible, immoral, and incapable of managing money. The last accusation was perfectly accurate. The others depended upon one's definition of morality. Lord Peter Wimsey, seated beside the bookcase, examined the spine of a 17th-century volume. An encouraging admission, he murmured. Parker ignored him. Your uncle intended to disinherit you? Yes. And you knew this before tonight? Julian's expression hardened. He told me after dinner. Why? Because he enjoyed doing unpleasant things personally. There was a pause. Parker opened his notebook. How much money were you expecting? Enough to keep Bellweather House. Your uncle intended to leave the house to somebody else? I don't know. Did you ask? No. Why? Because I was angry. Julian's face tightened. Parker continued. Angry enough to kill him? Julian looked directly at Parker. No. Parker opened his notebook again. Did you leave the study at approximately 9? Yes. Did you go directly upstairs? No. Where did you go? To the greenhouse. Why? I wanted air. Julian glanced toward the windows. I did not notice the rain. That is convenient. It is true. Parker looked down at Julian's boots. They were heavily soiled, the leather dark with wet earth. A narrow smear of black grease marked the right heel, while another streak appeared near the lower edge of his coat sleeve. You went through the greenhouse? Yes. Anyone see you? No. Why not? Because nobody was there. Parker's expression suggested that this was becoming less and less satisfactory. Did you return to the house? Yes. When? I don't know. Shortly before the bell. The 9:17 bell. Julian hesitated. I suppose so. Wimsey lifted his eyes. Suppose. I wasn't watching the clock. Quite. Parker turned a page. Your uncle's desk contained a letter. He removed a folded sheet from his notebook. Your handwriting? Julian stared at it. Yes. You wrote, if you force me out of this house, I shall make you pay for it. Yes. Why? Because I was furious. Did you mean it? Julian looked toward the fire. I meant that I would fight him. That is not what the letter says. No. Parker placed the letter on the table. Where did you write it? Yesterday. Was it sent? No. Why was it among your uncle's papers? I left it there. Deliberately. I don't remember. Wimsey rose and crossed the room. He did not touch the letter. He looked at it from a slight angle, then at Julian's hands. You have a rather vigorous pen, he observed. Julian frowned. What does that mean? Nothing whatever. Parker sighed. Peter, my dear Charles, I am admiring the handwriting. It is a perfectly innocent pastime. He returned to his chair. Parker folded the letter. You had motive, opportunity, and a quarrel with the dead man. Julian's face tightened. I did not kill him. You had motive, threat, and missing time. I said I did not kill him. Parker watched him. Do you know what happened inside that study? No. Do you know who could have entered? No. Do you know how the door was locked? No. Julian stepped toward the door. Am I under arrest? Not yet. The young man stopped. Then I would like to go. Parker nodded. Julian left. For a moment Parker remained silent. He's our man, he said. Wimsey looked at him. Is he? You heard him. I heard several things. Motive, threat, missing time, muddy boots. Yes. And he was the last person known to have quarreled with Sir Alister. Wimsey picked up the threatening letter. An excellent collection. You don't agree? I did not say that. You've got that expression. My dear Charles, I have several expressions. Most are hereditary. Parker stared at him. Wimsey read the letter again, then folded it carefully. The handwriting is rather forceful. You said that already, did I? Yes. Then I apologize for repeating myself. It is a vice usually associated with elderly relatives. Parker took the letter back. You think the evidence is weak? I think evidence is like port. One should not swallow it merely because somebody has poured it into a glass. Parker shook his head. The local police will want an answer. They shall have one when the answer deserves it. And if Julian is guilty, Wimsey looked toward the rain-streaked window, then I shall be extremely sorry for having been polite to him. The door opened again. Mrs. Agnes Bellweather stood there. Her face was pale. Inspector, there is something you should know. Parker turned. What is it? She looked at the letter in his hand. Sir Alister told me tonight that Julian would receive nothing. We know. No, she said quietly. You don't understand. She lowered her voice. He had already changed his will. Parker stared at her. To whom? Agnes looked toward the dark corridor. I don't know. Wimsey's expression did not change, but he folded the corner of his handkerchief once, very precisely. Outside, the rain beat against the windows, and somewhere upstairs the locked study waited with its dead occupant and its inconvenient silence. For once, even the fire seemed to be listening, with a patience rather too grave for comfort. Parker closed his notebook. "Now," he said, "we may have a murder." Wimsey glanced toward the ceiling. "We already had one." He paused. "What we have not yet established is why everyone is so eager to explain it." Section 4. The irrelevant carpet. By 10 o'clock, Lord Peter Wimsey had acquired the air of a man who had become bored with murder and was consequently examining the furniture. Inspector Charles Parker watched him kneel beside the study desk. "What are you doing?" "Looking at the carpet. I can see that." "Then my work here is nearly complete." The study had been left almost exactly as it was when the body was removed. Sir Alister's chair remained beside the desk. The cold cigar lay in its silver ashtray. The key was still on the desk, though Parker had ordered it photographed and bagged. The 2 windows were closed and secured. Wimsey leaned nearer to the carpet. "There," he said. "What?" "Nothing." Parker closed his eyes. "You have spent 5 minutes looking at nothing. 6, actually. I have always believed in giving nothing its proper attention." He moved his hand above the carpet without touching it. A small area beside the desk showed a flattened nap, slightly darker than the surrounding pile. It was scarcely noticeable unless one knew to look for it. Parker crouched beside him. "Somebody stood there?" "Somebody has certainly been there." "That hardly narrows it down." "No, but carpets are remarkably democratic. They remember everyone equally." Parker stood. Wimsey turned toward the windows. The curtains were drawn, but the left curtain hung nearly an inch lower than the right. The difference was so slight that it might have been the result of careless fingers. He examined the folds. Parker watched. "Now what?" "The curtains. Anything interesting?" "Possibly. You said the carpet was interesting." "I have said nothing about the carpet being interesting." "You have spent 6 minutes with it." 7, Parker groaned. Wimsey smiled and moved toward the door. The study door had been damaged when Parker forced it. The old lock was visible within the splintered wood, its mechanism partly exposed. "Old-fashioned," Wimsey said. "Yale lock. Indeed. Anything wrong with it?" "Not that I can see." Parker looked suspiciously at him. "You're enjoying this." "My dear Charles, enjoyment would be indecent. Curiosity is perfectly respectable." He turned to the corridor. The carpet outside the study was thick and faded, with a dark red pattern almost entirely swallowed by years of dust and polishing. Wimsey walked its length without speaking. He stopped near the corner. "Mr. Pritchard," the butler appeared. "My lord, how thick is this carpet?" Pritchard blinked. "I couldn't say exactly. Approximately. Perhaps half an inch, sir. And footsteps. Usually inaudible, even when someone walks quickly." "Yes, my lord." "Even directly outside the study?" "Yes." Wimsey nodded. "Thank you." Pritchard waited. "That is all. For the moment." The butler departed. Parker looked at Wimsey. "You knew that already. I suspected it. Why ask?" "Because suspicion is a very untidy housekeeper. It ought to be encouraged to prove its statements." They returned to the study. Mrs. Clara Finch was waiting just inside the doorway. She had been asked to identify several objects before they were removed. Wimsey pointed toward the small brass bell mechanism beneath the desk. "Mrs. Finch, how long has that been there?" "As long as I remember." "Does it work properly?" "Yes, instantly." She hesitated. "Usually." "Usually. It is old, my lord. Old things are frequently accused of being unreliable when they are merely misunderstood." Parker looked sharply at him. "When the study bell is pressed, how long before it sounds in the hall?" Mrs. Finch glanced at the mechanism. "It depends." "On what?" "On the condition of the wire." "The wire?" "Yes." "Could there be a delay?" "A short one." "How short?" "I wouldn't know." Wimsey nodded. "Thank you." She moved toward the door. "One more question." She stopped. "Who normally tests the bells?" "The servants." "Which servant?" "Any of us." "Do you know which bell belongs to which room?" "Of course." Even by sound? Yes. Wimsey smiled. That is an extraordinary accomplishment. It is part of running a house. Indeed. She left. Parker waited until her footsteps disappeared. You noticed that? I noticed several things. You asked her about the bells. Yes. Why? Because there is a bell in the room. Parker stared at him. Peter, yes. You are deliberately being impossible. Not deliberately. It comes naturally. He returned to the desk. The brass mechanism beneath it was small, almost ornamental, with a narrow metal lever and a wire running toward the wall. Wimsey crouched again, studying it without touching. Then he looked at the study door, then at the corridor, then at the curtains, then at the carpet. Parker followed his gaze. What connects those things? Wimsey's face became bland. Excellent question, and I am delighted that you asked it. Parker threw up his hands. You are not going to tell me? My dear Charles, if I told you everything I noticed, you would lose the pleasure of discovering how much you have failed to notice. Parker muttered something unprintable. Wimsey pretended not to hear. He walked to the fireplace and examined the clock on the mantel. It remained stopped at 20 minutes past 9. He did not touch it. Instead, he asked, Who winds this? Sir Alistair himself, Parker said. Every day? So I was told. By whom? Pritchard. Interesting. That's the 4th time you've said that. I should be grateful. It means I am consistent. Wimsey returned to the corridor. He stopped at the servant bell panel. Mrs. Finch. She appeared again almost immediately. Yes, my lord. Would you tell me something about the bell in the study? Her face remained perfectly composed. What would you like to know? Wimsey looked at her for a moment. Does it always ring at once? There was a pause. It lasted only 2 seconds, but Wimsey noticed. He raised one eyebrow. Mrs. Finch answered quietly. Yes, my lord. He said nothing further, but his silence seemed more attentive than any question he had yet asked that night. Section 5. The 9:17 problem. At 11 o'clock, Lord Peter Wimsey had spread a sheet of paper across the library table and was regarding it with the grave attention ordinarily bestowed upon a difficult crossword puzzle. Inspector Charles Parker stood opposite him. On the paper were 6 times 8:45, 9 o'clock, 9:10, 9:11, 9:17, 9:20. You have been writing those numbers for 20 minutes, said Parker. 23. I beg your pardon. Nothing. A small correction. Parker pulled out a chair. You've got the whole evening there. Only the portions people have been kind enough to give me. Wimsey placed his pencil beside the paper. Let us begin with what we know. Parker sat down. At 8:45, Julian argued with his uncle. So we are told. Edith heard it. Yes. Julian says he left shortly before 9. Yes. Agnes says she heard the study door close at 9, according to the hall clock, which is 4 minutes slow. Precisely. Parker frowned. Then that would make the door closing about 9:04. Wimsey nodded. Possibly. Doesn't that alter Julian's account? It alters the clock. Parker leaned over the paper. Pritchard saw the corridor empty at approximately 9:10, according to his recollection, and Edith heard the bell at 9:17, according to the hall clock. So the actual time was approximately 9:21, approximately. Parker looked irritated. You keep saying that, because the clocks keep deserving it. Wimsey rose and walked toward the library window. Rain traced crooked paths down the glass. Tell me again about the telephone call. Parker consulted his notebook. The exchange log records a call from Bellweather House at 9:11. To whom? The solicitor's office in Lewes. Duration, 3 minutes. Exact 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Wimsey turned. And who made it? The operator's record doesn't say. Did anyone in the house admit making it? No. Did anyone hear the telephone? Finch says she did not. Pritchard says he was in the pantry and cannot remember. Edith says she heard nothing. Julian? He says he was outside near the greenhouse. Wimsey nodded. Very obliging. Parker frowned. What? Nothing. Wimsey returned to the table and wrote 9:11 beneath the telephone entry. He then drew a line through 9:17. Parker stared. What does that mean? I am editing. You have crossed out the bell. I have not crossed out the bell. I have crossed out its authority. Parker waited. Wimsey said nothing more. After a moment, Parker asked, You think the bell is wrong? I think bells have no watches. That is not an answer. It is the answer available to me. Wimsey turned to the corridor. Mrs. Finch. The housekeeper appeared. Sir? Would you come here, please? She entered the library. Do you remember when the study bell rang? At approximately 9:17, according to the hall clock? Yes. Did you look at the clock when you heard it? Yes. Why? Because the sound startled me. Did you hear the bell itself, or the movement of the mechanism before it? The bell itself. Could there be any delay between the mechanism being activated and the bell sounding? Mrs. Finch looked at him. I don't believe so. You told me earlier that the wiring was old. It is, and that a short delay was possible. I said it might be. Quite. He smiled. Thank you. She left. Parker waited until the door closed. She contradicted herself. Did she? Yes. Perhaps. Peter. My dear Charles, if you wish to arrest people for inconsistency, we shall require a larger police station. Parker rubbed his forehead. Wimsey returned to the paper. Now, the study clock. It stopped at 9:20. Did anyone see it stop? No. Did anyone hear it stop? No. Then its evidence is rather lonely. Parker glanced at the ceiling. You're suggesting the clock was altered. Wimsey looked at him. I am suggesting nothing. You're writing 9:20 with a question mark. I am allowed punctuation. Parker sighed. Wimsey drew another line. Let us consider sound. He asked Pritchard to enter and close the library door. The butler complied. Walk along the corridor, Wimsey said. Pritchard did so. Parker heard almost nothing. Again, said Wimsey. Pritchard repeated the walk. Again the sound was scarcely audible. Wimsey opened the library door. Now walk quickly, Pritchard obeyed. The result was little different. Thank you. After Pritchard left, Parker said, So nobody could have heard footsteps outside the study. Not nobody. Most people. Quite. Wimsey looked toward the rain, which is rather useful. Parker pointed at the sheet. We have a call at 9:11, a bell at 9:17, and a clock stopped at 9:20. Somewhere in that interval the murder occurred. Wimsey's expression remained unreadable. Perhaps. Then which time matters? Wimsey tapped the telephone entry with his pencil. For the first time that evening his expression sharpened. Perhaps the one which nobody has thought worth discussing. Parker waited. Parker remained by the table. Could the telephone call have been made before the bell? Of course. After. Equally possible. Then the bell does not establish the time of the call. No. Nor does the study clock establish the time of death. Wimsey looked at him. You are learning, Charles. It is most gratifying. Parker ignored the compliment. What about the door? What about it? If the door was locked before the bell, nobody could have left. Wimsey considered this. Could they? Parker stared. You're doing it again. I am asking a grammatical question. Peter, let us say that a locked door establishes one fact, that the door was locked when it was examined, and not before. Exactly. Wimsey folded his hands. The past is annoyingly resistant to inspection. Parker glanced toward the library clock. It showed 11 minutes past 11. Your clock is slow too, he said. Wimsey smiled. Then Bellweather House is maintaining a consistent tradition. Wimsey glanced at the rain, which is useful. He returned to the sheet and drew a line beneath the 3 times. The figures remained separate, but they no longer seemed to belong to one orderly sequence. Parker watched him. What are you looking for? Wimsey's pencil paused. I am looking at what the house has been told to remember. And no conclusions, not even a preliminary one. Wimsey folded the paper once. My dear Charles, preliminary conclusions are the nursery toys of detective work. He slipped the paper into his pocket. Outside, the rain continued against Bellweather House, steady and indifferent. The evening had acquired a chronology. It was merely not yet clear whether the chronology belonged to the evening or to somebody who had carefully arranged it. Wimsey said nothing. He simply circled 9:11 twice. Section 6. The woman behind the name, outside, rain whispered against the windows, while somewhere below a servant moved quietly through the corridors, restoring order to a household that had lost it. Lord Peter Wimsey returned to Sir Alister's study alone. He opened a drawer. Nothing. Another. Nothing. He stopped before the bookcase. Shakespeare, he murmured, the refuge of adulterers, murderers, politicians, and people who cannot think of anything original to say. He ran a finger along the volumes. One book was slightly farther forward than the others. Wimsey drew it out. It was a large edition of Shakespeare's plays, bound in faded green leather. Something white slipped from between the pages and fell onto the carpet. A photograph. Wimsey picked it up. It showed a younger Sir Alister standing beside a woman. The woman was dark-haired, delicately featured, and smiling directly at the camera. Sir Alister was perhaps 30 years younger than the severe figure who now occupied the dead man's chair. On the back, written in faded ink, were 2 words, Eleanor Vane. Wimsey's expression changed, not dramatically. His face did not possess the habit, but the amusement disappeared from his eyes. Miss Edith Bellweather was sitting alone in the drawing-room, staring into the dying fire. She looked up when he entered. "Miss Bellweather, yes, I found something among your father's books." He placed the photograph upon the table. Edith looked at it. "You know her?" Edith opened them again. "Yes, Eleanor Vane. Yes, who was she?" Edith's fingers tightened against the arm of her chair. "My father knew her. That is evident. She was important to him." Wimsey sat opposite her. "In what capacity?" "I don't know." He waited. Edith gave a small, humorless laugh. "That is not quite true." "No, I know what people said." "And what did they say?" "That she was his mistress." The words settled between them. Wimsey did not react. "And was she?" "I never knew." "Did your mother know?" Edith looked toward the fire. "My mother knew there was a woman." "Eleanor Vane?" "Yes." "Did she know about the money?" Edith turned sharply. "What money?" Wimsey's expression remained mild. "Then perhaps I have asked an unnecessarily specific question." She stared at him. "My father sent money to someone named Eleanor Vane." "How do you know?" "I found letters once." "Where?" "In his desk." "Did you read them?" "Only enough to understand that he was supporting her." "Financially?" "Yes, regularly." "I believe so." Wimsey looked at the photograph again. "How long?" "I don't know. Years." "And your mother?" "She never spoke of it." "Neither did you?" "No. Why?" Edith's voice became quieter. "Because Bellweather House has always preferred silence to scandal." Wimsey nodded. "A common architectural feature." She almost smiled. Then her expression hardened. "There is something else." Wimsey waited. "Eleanor Vane lived here once." "When?" "Before I was born." "In this house?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" Edith hesitated. "My father called her a companion." "And your mother?" "My mother called her nothing." Wimsey leaned back. "Was Eleanor related to anyone here?" "I don't know." The answer came too quickly. Wimsey noticed, but did not challenge it. Instead he asked, "When did she leave?" "After an illness." "Whose?" "Her own." "And your father continued supporting her?" "Yes." "Until when?" "I don't know." Edith looked again at the photograph. "She died some years ago." Wimsey's gaze rested upon her. "Did she?" Edith looked up sharply. "I beg your pardon." "Nothing." He rose. At the door he paused. "Miss Bellweather, why was the photograph hidden?" "I don't know." "Who would have hidden it?" "I don't know." "Would your father have wanted it found?" "No." "Would your mother?" Edith looked toward the fire. "No." Wimsey nodded. "That is interesting." She watched him leave. In the corridor he encountered Mrs. Agnes Bellweather. She had evidently been waiting. "You found something," she said. It was not a question. Wimsey looked at her. "Your daughter has been helpful." "Edith is young." "She is 29. In some matters that is young." "Indeed." Agnes glanced at the photograph in his hand. "You know about Eleanor?" "Yes." "Then you know what my husband was like." Wimsey said nothing. Agnes lowered her voice. Sir Alister was not a kind man. That is not uncommon among successful men. He could be cruel, also not uncommon. He destroyed people when he believed they had crossed him. Wimsey studied her face. Did Eleanor cross him? No. Then why was she hidden? Agnes hesitated. Because my husband was ashamed. Of her? No. The answer was immediate. Of himself. Wimsey said nothing. Agnes continued. He kept her dependent upon him. He called it generosity. I called it control. Did you ever meet her? Yes. When? Years ago. And what did you think of her? Agnes looked toward the dark corridor. She was frightened of him. Was she? Yes. Why? I never asked. Wimsey's eyebrow lifted. You knew enough to be concerned, and not enough to be curious. Agnes gave him a tired look. In this family, curiosity was considered a form of disloyalty. Wimsey inclined his head. A dangerous doctrine. She looked again at the photograph. Who else knows? I have not decided. Agnes's eyes sharpened. You suspect someone. Wimsey smiled faintly. I suspect everybody of having a past. It is the one suspicion which seldom disappoints. He walked away. At the end of the corridor, the study door stood open, its broken lock catching the light. Wimsey looked back at the photograph. Eleanor Vane. The name was no longer merely a name. It belonged to a woman who had lived beneath this roof, received money from Sir Alister, and left behind a history that the household had carefully folded away. Wimsey slipped the photograph into his pocket. Behind him, Agnes Bellweather remained in the corridor, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. And somewhere in the silence of Bellweather House, an old family secret had ceased to be secret. Section 7. The window that wasn't open. The discovery was made by Constable Edward Moss, who announced it with the solemnity of a man who had found a second corpse. My lord, Inspector, there's a window open. Lord Peter Wimsey looked up from the writing desk. Open? Only a little, sir. Inspector Charles Parker followed Moss into the study. The left-hand window stood ajar by perhaps 2 inches. Rain had ceased, but drops still trembled upon the glass and gathered in bright beads along the sill. Parker frowned. That was shut earlier. So I was told, said Wimsey. Moss leaned closer. There's water here. There is, said Wimsey. Could someone have come through? Parker looked toward the flower bed below. Let's see. The 3 men moved to the window. Parker opened it farther and looked down. The ground beneath was soft from the night's rain. The flower bed stretched beneath the stone wall, dark and glistening. No footprints, he said. Moss looked disappointed. Not even near the wall. Wimsey examined the sill. Rain has been busy. Parker turned. What do you mean? Nothing more than that. He bent nearer. The sill carried a thin sheen of moisture, though the inner wood was comparatively dry. The curtain beside it hung unevenly, one fold pushed farther back than the others. Moss pointed. Could somebody have climbed in? Parker looked again. If they had, they left no mark. Wimsey said nothing. He reached into his pocket for a handkerchief, then stopped. Don't touch it. Moss withdrew his hand. I wasn't, my lord. You were thinking about it. The constable looked embarrassed. Parker crouched beside the sill. There is something here. A tiny black strand clung to the metal fastening. He looked at Wimsey. Thread. Wimsey nodded. Very good. Moss leaned forward. Could be from clothing. Could be, said Parker. Wimsey took a small pocket knife from his waistcoat. He did not use the blade. Instead, he slid it beneath the strand and lifted it gently from the fastening. The thread was fine, black and slightly glossy. Bag it, Parker said. Wimsey held it up for a moment. Perhaps. Parker frowned. Perhaps. Wimsey looked at the strand. Perhaps it belongs to somebody. Perhaps it belongs to the house, Moss said. How could thread belong to a house? My dear constable, you have never lived in one for 30 years. Parker gave him a look. Wimsey carefully placed the thread inside an envelope. He sealed it without comment. Where did you find this? He asked Moss. Caught on the fastening, sir. Had the window been opened before you arrived? I don't know. Did you touch the fastening? No, my lord. Good. Parker stood. This changes things. Wimsey glanced at him. Does it? We have a possible point of entry. Parker looked toward the flower bed again. Someone could have climbed up from outside. Wimsey's eyes rested on the wet earth below. Yes, but there are no footprints. Yes. So whoever came through was remarkably careful. Or remarkably imaginary. Parker frowned. Peter, I merely admire the skill required. Moss looked from one man to the other. Should we search outside? Yes, Parker said. Moss went down the corridor. Wimsey remained at the window. Parker joined him. You don't believe anyone entered here? Wimsey looked at the garden. I have not said what I believe. You never do. Not before breakfast. It is nearly midnight. Then you see my difficulty. Parker folded his arms. Look at the rainwater. Wimsey did. The sill is wet. Yes, and the inside edge is almost dry. Yes. What does that tell you? That the window has been wet. Parker stared at him. You are impossible. I have been told so by experts. Parker sighed. Footsteps approached. Moss returned, slightly muddy but triumphant in manner only. Nothing outside, sir. No footprints. None. Any disturbance? No. Parker dismissed him. Wimsey continued studying the fastening. The black thread was no longer there. Neither was there any sign that the window had been forced. Parker said, Could the wind have opened it? The latch is too stiff. Then someone opened it. Possibly. From inside? Possibly. Parker stared at him. You have become addicted to that word. It is an economical word. Wimsey walked to the desk. He looked at the study door, then the window, then the desk. He did not explain the sequence. Parker noticed. You're connecting them. Wimsey raised an eyebrow. I am standing in the same room. Parker shook his head. Did the murderer use the window? Wimsey's expression became almost cheerful. My dear Charles, you have just asked me a question to which I have no intention of giving you an answer. Why? Because if I did, you would stop asking useful questions. Parker looked toward the envelope containing the thread. This is useful. Yes. Very? Potentially. That is not much. It is more than we had 5 minutes ago. Parker turned toward the broken study door. I want every servant questioned again. Not yet. Why not? Wimsey looked once more at the window. Because everyone has already told us what they remember. And memory is a poor witness. Parker waited. Wimsey said nothing. The window remained slightly open. Rainwater glimmered upon the sill, and the dark flower bed below remained untouched. For the first time that night, the locked study seemed less like a sealed chamber and more like a stage upon which somebody had arranged a few props. But Wimsey did not say so. He simply placed the envelope in his pocket. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he looked at the black thread again and said, That is an interesting little piece of nonsense. Parker stared at him. Meaning? Wimsey smiled. Nothing at all. He closed the window gently, leaving the room exactly as they had found it. Outside, the wet garden offered no footprints, no broken flowers, and no convenient stranger. Only the rain remained, patiently washing away whatever the earth might once have remembered. The house remained good at silence. Section 8. The Bellweather Rehearsal. By midnight, Lord Peter Wimsey had acquired the air of a theatrical producer who had been handed a cast of unwilling amateurs and a play without an ending. Everyone into the corridor, please, he announced. Inspector Charles Parker stared at him. Why? Because murder, like Shakespeare, is occasionally easier to understand when performed. Mrs. Agnes Bellweather remained in the drawing room, pleading fatigue. Wimsey did not insist. The others assembled outside the study. Miss Edith Bellweather, Mr. Julian Bellweather, Mrs. Clara Finch, Mr. Herbert Pritchard, Constable Edward Moss, and Parker himself. Wimsey stood beside the study door. Mr. Pritchard, you will walk from the library to the study at your ordinary pace. Pritchard obeyed. His footsteps disappeared immediately into the thick corridor carpet. Again, said Wimsey. Pritchard repeated the walk. Now quickly. The butler hurried. Again, there was scarcely any sound. Parker nodded. That proves the corridor is quiet. Good, said Wimsey. We shall award you a medal presently. He turned to Finch. "Mrs. Finch, you will stand here." She obeyed. "Miss Bellweather, you remain by the stairs." Edith nodded. "Julian, the greenhouse door." Julian looked irritated. "Why?" "Because you have already visited it tonight, and I dislike wasting a good red herring." Julian said nothing. Wimsey handed Moss a watch. "At exactly 9 minutes past the hour, open the greenhouse door, remain there for 1 minute, and return." Moss looked bewildered. "Yes, my lord." Parker interrupted. "What has any of this to do with the murder?" "Nothing whatsoever. Then why are we doing it?" "To discover whether nothing whatsoever behaves consistently." Parker muttered under his breath. Wimsey walked into the study and closed the door. "Observe," he said. The door shut. A moment passed, then another. Nothing happened. Wimsey opened it. "Mr. Pritchard, lock the door." Pritchard examined the damaged lock. "I cannot properly lock it now, my lord." "Quite right. We shall imagine it undamaged." He closed the door again. From inside came a faint, metallic click. Parker looked at him. "What was that?" Wimsey opened the door. "An old house making an old house noise." He crossed to the desk and crouched beside the brass bell mechanism. "Now we shall try something." He touched the mechanism lightly, then stood. "Mrs. Finch, would you press the servant bell in the corridor?" She did so. Nothing happened immediately. Then, several seconds later, the bell sounded inside the study. Parker's face changed. There was a delay. "Yes. How long?" Wimsey looked at his watch. 6 seconds. Finch said. "That is unusual." "Is it?" "The mechanism has always been temperamental." Wimsey nodded. "Indeed." He reset it. Again. Finch pressed the bell. The same delay followed. 6 seconds. Parker looked at Wimsey. "So the bell does not necessarily ring when it is pressed. It rings when the mechanism permits it. That is a distinction without much difference." "Not necessarily." Wimsey walked to the desk. A fine black thread was attached temporarily to a small point beneath the bell mechanism. He showed it to Parker. "Watch." He pulled the thread gently. The mechanism moved. The bell did not sound. He released it. After several seconds, the bell rang. Parker stared. "How did you do that?" Wimsey removed the thread. "With a piece of thread." "I meant, how did the mechanism—" "Yes, Charles, I understood the question." Parker looked at the lock. "You could manipulate something from outside." "Could one?" Wimsey smiled. "One can demonstrate almost anything with sufficient patience." He did not explain. Instead, he handed the thread to Moss. "Hold this." Moss took it. "Now stand outside the study." The constable obeyed. Wimsey closed the door. From the corridor, Parker watched the narrow gap beneath it. A faint movement occurred, then silence. 6 seconds later, the bell rang. Parker stared. Wimsey opened the door. "Interesting. Very. Excellent." He turned to Julian. "Your boots." Julian looked down. "What about them? Where did you walk?" "To the greenhouse." "Show us." Julian led them through the side passage to the rear door. The ground beyond was muddy, but a narrow gravel path led from the greenhouse toward the house. Wimsey crouched. "Where did your boots become dirty?" Julian pointed toward the greenhouse. "Here." Wimsey examined the earth. "Not the study corridor." "No." Parker looked relieved. "So the mud proves nothing." Wimsey stood. "It proves that Julian has been walking in mud." "Thank you. My pleasure." They returned indoors. Pritchard brought the grandfather clock into view by opening the drawing-room door. "It is 4 minutes slow," he said. Wimsey looked at it. "Yes. Always? For several months. Who winds it?" "I do." "At 8. Every evening?" Wimsey nodded. "Good." He turned to Edith. "Tonight, when you heard the bell, what did you see?" "The hall clock." "And what did it say?" 21 minutes past 9. "Did you hear anything before the bell?" "No." "After? No footsteps?" "Exactly." She looked uneasy. "Yes." Wimsey glanced at Parker. Parker understood the question but not the answer. "What are you doing?" "Rehearsing." "For what?" Wimsey looked toward the study. "For a performance which has already taken place." He entered the study again. The others remained outside. The door closed. Parker watched the handle. Nothing moved. Then came a tiny metallic click. The bell rang several seconds later. Parker turned toward Finch. She was watching the door. Her expression remained perfectly calm. Wimsey opened it. "Thank you, everyone." Parker stared at him. "That is all? For tonight? You've made us walk corridors, ring bells, inspect boots, and listen to clocks. Wisdom dessen, yes. And you haven't explained anything. My dear Charles, explanations are terribly exhausting." Parker lowered his voice. "You know something." Wimsey's eyes rested briefly upon the study. "I know that a house can be made to remember an event inaccurately." Parker waited. Wimsey smiled, but whether anyone deliberately taught it to remember wrongly is another matter. He walked away. Parker remained beside the study door. Behind him, the bell sounded once more. No one had touched it. Section 9, the unmasking, a death at 9/11. At midnight, Lord Peter Wimsey gathered the household in the drawing room. Inspector Charles Parker stood beside the fireplace. Mrs. Agnes Bellweather sat rigidly upon the sofa. Miss Edith Bellweather and Mr. Julian Bellweather remained near the window. Mrs. Clara Finch stood behind them, composed as ever. Mr. Herbert Pritchard waited near the door. Wimsey stood very still. "I am afraid," he said, "that we must now discuss the one subject which respectable households prefer to leave alone." Nobody spoke. Time. He took a sheet of paper from his pocket. The study clock stopped at 20 minutes past 9. The hall clock is 4 minutes slow. The study bell was heard when the hall clock showed 17 minutes past 9. The telephone exchange records a call from this house at 9/11. These facts have been treated as though they were successive steps in one sequence. He paused. "They are not." Parker folded his arms. "Sir Alister died at 9/11. Julian looked up sharply. "You know that?" "Yes." "Then why?" "Because," said Wimsey, "everything which happened afterward was arranged to make us believe otherwise." A silence followed. Wimsey turned toward the study door. The locked room was never the real puzzle at all. The puzzle was the clock. He looked at Parker now. "Let us begin at the beginning." At 8:45, Julian quarreled with his uncle. The argument was genuine. The anger was genuine. Julian genuinely threatened Sir Alister. He then left the study and went toward the greenhouse. "Muddy boots," Wimsey said, "were real, but irrelevant." Julian stared at him. "I told you." "Yes, you did." At 9:04, according to the corrected household time, Sir Alister was alone in his study. Clara Finch entered with his drink. She had access to the room, knew its habits, understood its servants, and knew the bells. Parker turned toward her. Finch did not move. Wimsey continued. She had also spent years managing the house. She knew which bells were temperamental, which corridors swallowed footsteps, and which clocks could be trusted. "The bell," said Parker. "Exactly." Wimsey walked to the table. "The bell did not tell us when it was activated. It told us when its mechanism finally permitted the signal to sound. We demonstrated the delay." "But 6 seconds cannot account for 6 minutes, Parker objected. "No, and it need not." Wimsey looked at him. The mechanism was prepared in advance. The bell heard at 9:17 was evidence only that the signal had been arranged to occur then. It was not evidence that Sir Alister was alive when the household heard it. He turned to the others. "At 9:11, Sir Alister died." Edith covered her mouth. Agnes closed her eyes. Finch remained motionless. "After the death," Wimsey continued, "the room was carefully staged. The study clock stopped at 9:20. The purpose was to make the later bell seem consistent with activity," Parker said. "And the window, a prop." He looked at Edith. "The curtains were disturbed. Rainwater appeared upon the sill. A black thread was caught upon the fastening. Yet there were no footprints beneath the window. Morse had been right. No one entered through it that night. No one escaped through it. It was merely made to suggest that someone might have done so." Parker frowned. "And the lock?" "The same principle. We assumed that because the door was locked when it was forced, it must have been locked continuously." He smiled faintly. "A charming assumption, also an unwarranted one." Wimsey explained the thread. "The mechanism could be manipulated from outside, allowing the door to appear secured without requiring a murderer to remain trapped within the room." Parker's expression hardened. So the locked room was staged. Yes. Then the murderer had to know the mechanism. Yes. Who? Wimsey did not answer immediately, however. Instead, he took the photograph from his pocket and placed it upon the table. Eleanor Vane. Agnes looked away. Edith stared at the picture. Parker understood first. Finch. Clara Finch's face changed. Wimsey turned toward her. Your name was not always Finch. She said nothing. You were Clara Vane. The room became perfectly still. Eleanor Vane was your sister. Finch's composure cracked. Wimsey continued quietly. Sir Alistair supported Eleanor for years. He called it generosity. He kept her dependent upon him. You knew it. You knew what he had done to your family, and you knew how much control he exercised over your sister. That proves nothing, Finch whispered. No. Wimsey's voice remained gentle. It proves motive. The chronology supplies the method. Parker stepped forward. Wimsey raised a hand. Let her hear it. He looked at Finch. You entered the study with the drink. You poisoned it. At 9:11, Sir Alistair died. You then altered the clock, arranged the delayed bell, manipulated the lock, and opened the window just enough to manufacture an intruder. Finch shook her head. You cannot prove that. I can. He pointed toward the bell. You knew its behavior. When I asked whether it always rang at once, you hesitated. He indicated the thread. You knew precisely how such a mechanism could be manipulated. Then the photograph. And you knew why Sir Alistair deserved, in your mind, to die. Finch stared at Eleanor's face. Parker looked at Wimsey. The telephone call. Useful camouflage. A call recorded at 9:11 establishes that the house was active at the crucial time. It does not establish who was where. It encourages everyone to think in terms of clock time rather than physical time. Wimsey turned back to Finch. You did not create an impossible room. You created a false timetable. Finch's lips trembled. Why? Wimsey answered softly. Because you wanted Sir Alistair's death to appear to belong to a later moment when your own movements would seem harmless. He paused. The house was your witness. Finch looked toward the ceiling. No, she whispered. Wimsey's eyes hardened. The house was your accomplice. And for the first time that night, Clara Finch looked like a woman who knew that silence could no longer save her. Section 10. Clara Finch breaks. Clara Finch did not sit down. She remained beside the drawing-room door, a hand resting against the carved wood, as though the house itself might still provide some convenient refuge. Inspector Charles Parker stood between her and the corridor. No, she said again. Lord Peter Wimsey watched her quietly. You cannot prove it. I think, said Wimsey, that we have a surplus of proof. You have a story. A story is what novelists provide. I have a sequence. Her eyes flashed. You found a photograph and invented the rest. Then let us discard the photograph. Wimsey lifted it from the table. Suppose Eleanor Vane never existed. Edith looked at him in astonishment. Peter, bear with me. He placed the photograph face down. Suppose there was no sister, no grievance, no secret correspondence, no hidden history. We should still have the death at 9:11, the delayed bell, the altered clock, the manipulated lock, the window, the thread, and one person who knew the house sufficiently well to use them. Finch's face had gone very pale. Parker stepped nearer. Mrs. Finch, you told us you were polishing silver from 8:50 until 9:25. Yes. 6 candlesticks. Yes. You say you never left the pantry. I did not. Wimsey smiled faintly. An excellent alibi if the pantry possessed a witness. Pritchard looked uncomfortable. I saw Mrs. Finch there, sir. At what time? Wimsey asked. I cannot say exactly. Before 9? Yes, after 9. Pritchard hesitated. I believe so. Believe. Yes. Wimsey nodded. There is the difficulty. Finch spoke sharply. You cannot expect servants to remember every minute. No, said Wimsey, which is why I do not. He turned to Parker. The alibi was constructed from habit, not observation. Pritchard knew that Mrs. Finch ordinarily polished silver at that hour. He remembered the activity, not every instant of her presence. Finch's composure wavered. You are twisting ordinary uncertainty into evidence. Only because you supplied the uncertainty. She looked toward Agnes. You knew what he was. Agnes stared at her. Clara, he destroyed people. Her voice rose. He destroyed my father. He destroyed my mother. He destroyed Eleanor. And he called every ruin justice. Edith stood. You were Eleanor's sister? Finch laughed once bitterly. Yes. The word seemed to empty the room. My name was Clara Vane. Eleanor was my younger sister. Sir Alister took an interest in her when she was frightened and alone. He gave her money. He gave her a room. He gave her everything except freedom. Wimsey said nothing. Finch continued. She depended upon him. He liked that. He could call it kindness because nobody questioned a rich man's generosity. Parker's voice softened. Why did you return here? To watch him. For how long? 3 years. And tonight? She looked toward the floor. Tonight I decided I had watched long enough. Wimsey did not move. You prepared the bell beforehand? Yes. The clock? Yes. The window? Yes. The lock? Finch closed her eyes. Yes. Parker drew a breath. And the poison? A longer silence. Yes. Edith began to cry quietly. Julian turned away. Agnes remained motionless. Wimsey looked at Finch. Why make the death appear later? To give myself time. For what? To be seen elsewhere. The pantry. Yes. Yet you could not make yourself seen there continuously. No. And you relied upon everyone remembering the bell instead. Finch looked at him. I knew they would. Why? Because the bell always announced Sir Alister's supper, his letters, his callers. Everyone listened to it. Wimsey nodded. A household trained to obey a bell is easily trained to obey its timing. Finch's eyes filled with tears. I wanted him to die alone. He did. I wanted everyone to think someone had come from outside. They did. I wanted Julian blamed. Wimsey's expression changed slightly. Why? Because he hated Sir Alister. It was obvious. But you did not need him condemned. No. Then why? Because I wanted Sir Alister's death to look like the consequence of everything he had done. I wanted suspicion to fall upon the people he had wounded. Wimsey regarded her sadly. And so you wounded them again. Finch said nothing. Parker moved forward. You will have to come with me. She nodded. Then she stopped. One thing. Parker waited. Finch looked at Wimsey. When did you know? Wimsey considered the question. I knew that the bell was lying before I knew who had taught it to lie. And me. You became interesting when you hesitated. Her eyes narrowed. Only that? No. He looked toward the study. The housekeeper who knows every bell, every corridor, every servant's habit, and every sound made by the machinery possesses rather too much knowledge to be accidental. Finch gave a tired smile. You could have accused me earlier. I could. Why didn't you? Because suspicion is cheap. Proof is expensive. She looked down. That is a cold way to put it. It is a very warm profession, murder investigation. Parker almost smiled. Finch's expression softened. I am sorry. Nobody answered. She looked at Edith. I never hated you. Edith wiped her eyes. I know. I hated what this house represented. Wimsey glanced around the room. Unfortunately, houses are innocent. They merely retain the habits of their occupants. Finch gave a small, broken laugh. Then she walked toward Parker. At the doorway, she stopped and looked back once. The bell was supposed to ring at 9:17. Wimsey nodded. I know. I thought that would make everything perfect. My dear Mrs. Finch, perfection is generally the first thing to betray a lie. Parker escorted her from the room. The door closed behind them. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Julian exhaled. So the muddy boots meant nothing. Not nothing, said Wimsey. They meant you had muddy boots. Julian stared at him. Wimsey smiled. It is important not to ask evidence to become more dramatic than it really is. The drawing room fell quiet again. Only this time nobody was waiting for the bell. Section 11. The house remembers. Morning came to Bellweather House with efficiency. The rain had stopped. Pale sunlight rested upon the lawns, revealing every leaf and stone. The police car waited beside the drive. Inspector Charles Parker had finished his paperwork, and Clara Finch had been taken away. Lord Peter Wimsey stood upon the terrace with a cigarette between his fingers. Parker joined him. "You are leaving." "I had hoped to make that impression." "You have not finished your coffee." "My dear Charles, coffee is never finished. It merely becomes cold." Parker looked back at the house. "It seems extraordinary. Most murders do, once they have stopped being murders and become paperwork." Parker smiled. "You really did solve it through the bell?" "No. I solved it through the difference between what the bell appeared to say and what it could actually prove." He flicked ash from his cigarette. "The bell was merely the loudest liar in the house." Parker considered this. "And the window, a theatrical flourish. The clock, a second flourish. The threatening letter from Julian, genuine. The muddy boots, genuine. The telephone call, genuine." Parker shook his head. "So nearly everything was true." "Precisely." Wimsey looked toward the study window. "That is what made the deception effective. A falsehood surrounded by truths is much harder to detect than a falsehood surrounded by lies." Parker nodded slowly. "And Eleanor Vane, genuine too. She really was Clara Finch's sister." "Yes." "Did Sir Alistair deserve what happened?" Wimsey looked at him. "Ah, what? You have asked the question which murder always invites, and justice rarely answers comfortably." Parker waited. "Did he deserve to die?" "No." Wimsey's answer was immediate. "Did he deserve condemnation?" "That is another matter. And Clara believed she was correcting an old injustice, but she wasn't." "No." Wimsey's expression became thoughtful. "She merely created a new one." They stood silently for a moment. From somewhere inside the house came the faint sound of a servant moving crockery. Parker glanced toward the windows. "You said the house remembers." "Yes. What does it remember?" "Everything people imagine they have hidden." Parker laughed. "That sounds almost supernatural." "My dear Charles, houses require no supernatural assistance. Give them enough frightened people and they will manufacture ghosts quite efficiently." He stubbed out his cigarette. "Come." "Where?" "I want one last look at the study." They entered Bellweather House. The corridors seemed different in daylight. The thick carpets were merely carpets. The shadows beneath the pictures were merely shadows. The locked study had become an ordinary room containing an ordinary desk and the unpleasant remains of an extraordinary night. Wimsey entered. Parker followed. The broken lock had been photographed and removed. The curtains were open. Sunlight fell across the carpet. Wimsey stood beside the desk. "You know," he said, "there is something almost comic about it." "What?" "The murderer spent hours arranging clocks, bells, curtains, windows, and locks. And she forgot the simplest thing." Parker looked at him. "What?" "She believed everyone would remember the same time." Parker smiled. "People don't. Never." Wimsey walked to the mantel. The study clock still showed 20 minutes past 9. He picked it up. "Should we have it repaired?" Parker shrugged. "Why not?" Wimsey considered the stopped hands. "No. Why? Let it remain." "As a reminder?" "Of course. To murder, to human ingenuity." He replaced the clock. "Clara Finch believed she could command time because she could command the machinery which displayed it. And she couldn't. Nobody can." Parker looked around the room. "Except you." Wimsey laughed. "My dear Charles, I am frequently late." They left the study. At the front door, Agnes Bellweather waited. "Are you going?" "Yes." She looked toward the stairs. "I hardly know what happens now." "Neither does anyone else. What will happen to the house?" Wimsey glanced back. "It will survive. That is all. Houses are extraordinarily durable." She gave a faint smile. "Will you remember us?" "My dear Mrs. Bellweather, detectives remember clues. Families remember detectives. It is a useful division of labor." She held out her hand. Wimsey took it. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet. I have not sent my bill." For the first time since the murder, Agnes laughed. Parker opened the door. Cold morning air entered the hall. Wimsey stepped outside, then paused. He looked back at Bellweather House. The great windows reflected the pale sky. Nothing about it suggested poison, revenge, deception, or death. It looked respectable. That, Wimsey thought, was perhaps its greatest accomplishment. He turned to Parker. "Do you remember the Latin?" "What Latin?" "The phrase I was trying to recall last night." "I don't think you ever told me." "Quite right. It was a quotation from Horace." "What does it mean?" "Time reveals truth." Parker smiled. "That seems appropriate." "Not entirely." "Why not?" "Because time does not reveal truth. People do." He walked toward the waiting car. Parker followed. Behind them, Bellweather House stood in the morning light, its locked study empty at last, its clocks silent, its bells obedient. For one brief moment, Wimsey looked back briefly. Then he smiled. "After all," he said, "even a house may keep a secret, provided nobody asks it the right question." He got into the car. Parker closed the door. As they drove away, Bellweather House diminished behind the trees until only its chimneys remained visible. The murder was solved. The mystery was finished, and the house, having lied once, returned to the far more respectable business of keeping its ordinary secrets. If you had been watching from your own corner of the world, what would you have suspected first? The bell, the window, the clock, or Julian's muddy boots? Tell us your theory in the comments, and if you enjoyed this mystery, join us for the next case. Wimsey lit another cigarette. "Now," he said, "let us find somewhere that serves breakfast." And with that, he disappeared down the wet country road, leaving Bellweather House behind him, and the morning to decide what it would remember.